One. All right, welcome to the Spirit Soul Series podcast. And today we're going to continue Supriya Chechi and we're going to start the chapter 5 of the Bhagavad Gita. I think we can
Okay,
start Supriya Chechi. Start.
right. Thank you, Kanan, and very happy to be back. Hare Krishna
Yeah,
and
Hare
all.
Krishna.
Hare Krishna. So this chapter 5 of the Bhagavad Gita, if you study the chapter titles, chapter 3 is called Karma Yoga, and chapter 5 is again called Karma Yoga, and chapter 4 in between is of course Dhyan, transcendental knowledge. So it's like it naturally makes you wonder why is that? Why is there this repetition of the same title? Because what is promised or taught in chapter 3 is elaborated upon in chapter 5, and therefore the title of the chapter is not just Karma Yoga, but how to actually act in the proper mentality while doing Karma Yoga. So this is important because it's often we hear the average or regular materialist who is religious and God-fearing, he will say, oh, I am a karma yogi. I do all my duties. So you can't fault me for anything and I'm in a safe position. But that's maybe partially true, but the really significant part of it is completely missing from their understanding and their practice. And that's what's given here in chapter 5. Because karma yoga doesn't just mean that you do your duty. The yoga half of that title, the yoga means basically you got to connect with the Lord. Now, if something has to become a yoga, then you have to do exactly what the Lord asks you to do in that particular situation. Otherwise, it is not yoga at all. Like you can wave your hands and legs around in the air and call it hatha yoga. It's not. It's just physical exercise. When we come to chapter 6, we'll realize that there are a whole lot of do's and don'ts that have to be followed in order for it to qualify as a yoga. Otherwise, it is just some hatha something. Yeah, it's good physical exercise. It keeps you fit, makes you feel good. So karma yoga is not real karma yoga unless you gradually cultivate the consciousness to get detached from the fruits of your actions, from the results. So they're trying to Srila Prabhupada's purpose, and primarily Lord Krishna answering Arjuna's questions where he's expressing more confusion is going to explain what are the symptoms of a person who is actually able to do that, who's able to do his duty, but at the same time is distant from or detached from the results of his actions. And although this seems like a somewhat dry philosophical discussion, the short chapter 5 is pretty short. It's only 29 verses. Chapter 12 is even shorter, only 20 verses. So chapter 5 here, although it may seem technical and little philosophical and abstract, it's actually one of those chapters where it very much helps us in our practice. And you realize this, how some of the verses are such a beacon or a torchlight. You realize this as you've been practicing for some years, and then you once again, when we are reading and revising chapter 5, hearing a really good speaker on some of these verses, you realize that it tells you, I will come to certain 4 or 5 significant verses which tell you how really to be a karma yogi who is giving up the results of his actions or not attached to the results of his actions. So here I think we can straight away go to verse 12, because in verse 12,
It says the steadily devoted soul attains unadulterated peace because he offers the result of all activities to me. Whereas a person who is not in union with the divine, who is greedy for the fruits of his labor, becomes entangled.
okay, now first, key word here is peace, unadulterated peace. And like you and I know, practically the whole world is trying to become peaceful and campaigning for peace and etc. But why it's not possible is because the material platform, or if you do and act in material consciousness, the peacefulness is not going to happen because the underpinning of everything material is fear. Any idea why? Why
Because
is why is it
of
that whether it's material literature, material novels, some things are very enjoyable, but they're not going to
because
lead you even one step closer to peacefulness. They will leave you as fearful. The reason, you can take any perspective on it, meaning because you can just think whether what is the reason why the underpinning of everything material is fear. Because material
But
means
I think there's like an attachment or something. So that losing, like, what do you say? That thing, the thought that attachment can go away. So,
yeah,
which,
absolutely. That go away is the important point, because
mm,
material means matter, it means it's temporary.
mm,
Whatever it may be this computer, it may be the camera that stopped working in my computer, which made my Zoom sessions possible. It can be a dress I'm wearing, it can be a person like my good friend Meera who passed away last week. Matter means it is temporary. It's here today, it may be there tomorrow, it may be gone tomorrow or the following week or year. So that, because we deep down jolly well know that, we are seeing that happen all the time. Even a housewife would say, I know nothing about philosophy. What is she in constant anxiety about? Speak to any housewife. People we know, people we don't know. She's completely dependent on, say, that very trustworthy maid who comes. The maid may just throw up everything. Maid may fall, maid may get COVID. Or restrictions put in place in the flats means nobody can enter. So there's always a fearfulness and anxiety, because material arrangements are always temporary. Material items, objects are temporary, so they can go, like you said, go away. So the underpinning of anything material is fear. And where there is fear, it's not possible to be peaceful at all. So in one sense, all these big campaigns for peace, they are well intentioned, but they are barking up the wrong tree, because as long as it's all on the material platform, they are not going to achieve it, at least not in a lasting way. Whereas on the contrary, on the other hand, if somebody is finally and gradually and after years of practice and or quickly, because he's bringing some karma from a previous life, he or she, if they quickly come to the understanding that we are not the real doers, the ultimate doer is the Lord, or the Lord is our very good friend, He is the only shelter, everything is under His control. If they really internalize this, then the fearfulness goes away, because anyway, it is not in our hands to stop any of these things. We accept it. So if something is not in our hands, what is the use of worrying about it? At least if you're a little intelligent, you will think like that. So therefore, this verse 12, it says, the steadily devoted means he is constantly in remembrance of the Lord and hearing and understanding the Lord's words in Gita and Bhagavatam and trying to practice, attains unadulterated peace because he offers the result of all activities to me. The other great reason, source for anxiety and fearfulness is we may not get what we are expecting or desiring. We know that we may not get the results that are in proportion to the effort we have put in a situation. Whether it's for an exam, a job interview, or a lifetime of sacrifices to keep a family going, one war or just one accident, one or two members of the family just are gone. And there are people who live like this. I once used to tell this story. In this class, I can't hear her name. She was a South Indian dancer, and her Tamilian, her parents arranged a marriage to an eligible young Tamilian in Canada. She had two beautiful daughters. They had just entered college, and she was still dancing. So her guru, her dance guru's some 70th or 80th birthday celebrations in Mumbai meant that on the annual visit to India, she came earlier, and the three of them came in another flight. That was a flight that was bombed. It was that Canada Sikh issue.
Sikh rights, that one.
Right, Pan Am flight, yeah.
Oh,
So yeah, all three were gone. She was here waiting for them. It was a very happy family and very successful and very. You can't see them running into any trouble. But she's still alive today. She had to carry on. Of course, family came to her help. She first tried to come away. She sold whatever they owned in Canada and came here. Then she decided to go back and face the reality there. Then she took up her dance career. But it's very hard on her. There was no clue that something like this would happen to a relatively pious and straightforward, happy family. So the material world is such a shaky place that
It's
You say
in my this thing, like I feel like in my experience, what one of the ways I feel like what you can do to get rid of that fear, even it's not a guaranteed thing, but like
yeah.
because it still happens. But I feel like if you like when you're getting some kind of success, no, in that moment, if you say that this success also doesn't belong to me, like the success belongs
Yes,
to,
yes,
let's say, the success also belongs to Krishna. Like even the joy that you feel is because of his doing, the Lord's doing, or whatever. If
yes,
you think in that way, then what will happen is that when you are like when you're feeling fearful also, you realize even that is also like, it's basically the external energy or the external potency of the Lord that's playing, which is the Maya energy. So when you understand that, when you understand both of them, you realize that there's
right.
no need to be fearful, or there's no need to be happy also. There's just like, you just need to be, you just need to think about Lord, the God, the whole time. You don't need to be in any other kind of state. If you become, because I've noticed it, if I become too happy, then I get sucked into that. And if I get too like I there are times when I become like something like hits me, I get a little scared, but then suddenly I realize that but this is also temporary. So then you're able
Mm,
to like let it go.
correct.
But that only
Mm,
happens if you are humble enough to sort of just accept that even like even the things that you get, like the good things that you get, are not because of you. It's because of something else. So you have to, like, I guess that may help, I guess, in
very
certain
much, it will
instances.
definitely help, and that's actually the ideal mentality. But it's possible to keep maintaining that mentality only if they are doing what you are doing, which is you're reading regularly. This
Hmm.
is one of the limbs of bhakti, Shravan, Kirtan, hearing. Hearing, okay, nowadays it's reading. You can't always be hearing lectures, so it's just that you're seeing visually what otherwise would have gone in through your ears. So if you're
Hmm.
practicing one of the, and you're doing other things also, you're doing your meditation and you're doing your chanting and so on.
Bhagavatam, Bhagavatam is very I feel like Bhagavatam is very important because I feel
Very.
like because I've read the Gita like twice, but I feel like what the Bhagavatam does is also like it expands on the Gita in a
Absolutely,
very
absolutely.
in a bigger way. Like you'll read the idea of like the material world and not being attached and all that stuff, but then they explain it in so many different ways that you'll finally inevitably get it. You'll understand it eventually. That you'll understand
Absolutely.
eventually. Okay, this is the point they're trying to make, because
Yes,
if
because
initially
you
if like
see it in
why yeah
action.
correct
Yeah,
yeah.
you
So
see it in
yeah
action in the Bhagavatam, all those cases and incidents and stories. Absolutely, you
yeah
see it in action.
yeah
Yeah. Narada Muni, as a small child, dependent on his mother, who was a maidservant. And suddenly the mother is killed by snake bite, and he's left all alone in the world. But somehow he sees this as a favorable circumstance for him to become God realized. So to be able to think at that level and to practice, all these examples are there. Even if we can't do it exactly the way they do it, the inspiration is there. You're absolutely right. The Bhagavad Gita is considered ABC, and the Bhagavatam is really what is a very rich source of nourishment for us to see how what the Bhagavad Gita tells us to do can actually be done. So this verse 12, like you said, that ideal mentality, then that Krishna is the supreme doer or the ultimate cause or the ultimate doer. We have very limited role to play, and this makes us situated in such a way that you remind yourself when things go right, you have to not take the credit yourself and see that a higher force or Krishna is in control. Because when things go wrong, it's very easy to remember the Lord and to put all the blame on a higher force. But when things go right and things actually work out for you, like you said, it's rarely that we try to give the credit or we understand that someone else is actually sanctioned or given it to us. So therefore, only a person who is in that kind of mentality will be able to not be fearful and to be peaceful. This is the verse, this is the secret, the end of that purport, verse 12. If you go to the end of the purport, it says, this is the secret of Krishna conscious realization that there is nothing or no existence beyond Krishna. That is a platform of peace and fearlessness. Two other points here. One point is about peace. Yeah, this is the one, 5.12. See? Hmm.
so it
The
says
second.
Yeah, you got what?
Second sentence here is saying the person who's attached to Krishna and
Uh,
works for him only is certainly a liberated person and he has no anxiety over the results of his work. Whereas the other person has a lot of anxiety because he's not attached to Krishna, he's attached, first sentence is telling us that he's attached to the results of his activities. So there's a difference in the object of attachment, and that is the source of, that is a real issue. That is the source of all the problems. See, one person is attached to the results of his activities and is constantly fearful that it doesn't know how the results will come out. The other person is attached to Krishna himself as the doer and the sanctioner and the witness and the sakshi and ultimately the totally in being in control. So why worry about the results? It's anyway not in our hands. We do our best and leave the rest, as the saying goes. Here, another thing to remember is two things. One is in order to attain this mentality that we are talking about, one has to very clearly be situated at least on the platform of that we are spirit, soul, and not the body. Because until now, all these chapters have been telling us, chapter 2 elaborately about the spirit, soul, and its size, and so on, and how it moves from body to body, and nothing get destroyed. But to actually think in every situation that I am not this body, but I am spirit, soul, it's a very difficult task, because what happens is the spirit soul is minute in size, but it is oceanic in the number of desires it has. That is why it is given a body to fulfill those desires. So the desires are so strong, and it is artificial to just suppress the desires. That doesn't really work. It is artificial to suppress the senses. So you have to do something with the desires that are there even at the level of the soul. And we've been given this body to, of course, Krishna sanctions what we desire, but also provided we deserve it. I might desire to be born as beautiful as Maharani Gayatri Devi and as rich and as it, yeah, but if you don't deserve it, of all that, and a much smaller scale. So there are two things, that we get what we desire and also what we deserve. That therefore Krishna is the ultimate sanctioner, and we get a body. Specifically, the spirit soul acquires a body and comes life after life to be able to satisfy these desires, which are oceanic. Although the soul itself is very tiny, 1 by 10,000, the size of a tip of the hair. The other point to remember here is where all these complications start and the fearfulness comes in, etc. One is an inability to distinguish between the spirit, soul, and the body. The other thing is there is another element called material nature. That is not just nature as in terms of mountains and trees and all, but just material nature that is created. The universes are created and so on. So the spirit soul is basically superior to material nature. He is sent down. Let's say from a previous life, he comes down. He has got a body. He has to manipulate material nature in order to satisfy his desires. For this, when the soul comes, his false ego also comes with him. The ego comes with him. So when death takes place and the soul passes on, not only we cannot see the soul, there are two other things that go with the soul. Three other things. The soul goes, the mind, intelligence, and false ego also go with that soul. So the mind goes into the next body with that soul as a repository of so many experiences you've had. Mostly, the Lord puts a curtain so that you don't have to remember. Sometimes, if you've already been a devotee in a previous life, at a certain stage in your life, He lifts that curtain. It's like jogging or reviving a certain memory, and suddenly some spark happens. You meet someone, you see something, you start getting very interested and take another track. It can also happen to musicians. Children from a certain age, they saw a certain vasana in Malayalam. They very quickly pick up a certain instrument. They can just hear a tune once and repeat it. Child prodigies. This coming from a previous life. How is it coming? Because when the soul came into the next body, the mind traveled with it. And the mind is there. The mind is like a repository of all the experiences and so many things, memories. Not only the mind, the intelligence and the false ego also come. Unless the false ego comes, we won't be, the false ego is an instrument through which we start dominating material nature, manipulating it, getting this, getting that, just doing things. So this is the scenario. There is material nature, there is we, that is the Atma, and there is the Supreme Lord Himself. So this chapter 5 really starts pricing open this whole big question, who really is responsible for the suffering of the jiva, the suffering of you or me? Who is responsible? Because there are three actors in this drama. There is we ourselves, there is material nature in the background, always facilitating and making the arrangements. And then there is the Supreme Lord who has to sanction. Without sanction, it won't happen. So it's the interplay of all this. And there comes a certain level of spiritual maturity where you have a desire, you know very well it is something negative. Suddenly you see that material nature has made a illicit arrangement for you to satisfy that illicit desire, which you know very well is going to take you away from Krishna. But by then, if your intelligence and spiritual intelligence is so strongly developed, you exercise a choice and you say, I don't want it.
I
What
had
is
this
it?
happen actually. What you said, no, I had this happen recently. You know, I was like, I went on for like almost like a month or something, like just constantly reading the Bhagavatam and listening to various talks and all that. And suddenly I had to do something. Like one day I was with like my friends or whatever, and we were
Hmm.
playing. I mean, every week like we play cricket. You know, every week like we'll end up playing cricket.
Right,
So
right.
like but this was after a gap of a very long time, and
Uh-huh.
I was reading all these things, and they're all like, very nice to hear and all that. But then when I'm playing now, obviously, like we have this rivalry amongst guys. We'll say things like,
Right, right.
we tease each other and we'll make fun of the other person, and we'll say all this stuff.
Sure.
So when that happened, no, it was like a
Yeah.
what do you say? I could feel like this, like visceral reaction, like to that whole experience. Like I could feel like a
Uh-huh.
change after a point. I'm like, yeah, but this is so weird. Like I used to do it before, but I find it so weird now. And so then,
Uh-huh.
like,
What did
you
you do?
know,
What
it,
did you do? Yeah.
no, I realized that, like, in the past, like, I would just say one thing, and then it would cause like, something I would say, like some word or something, some insult or something I would say to the other person.
Uh-huh.
And like
Uh-huh.
it was just done simply like that, right? And I just realized the conversations we would have amongst each other also was like kind of degraded in a way, like a little bit, like, we're talking a lot about very small stuff, basically. So
Okay. Okay.
then that is when I constantly made, without telling anybody or without saying anything, I just made a conscious decision that no, and I'm gonna talk, I'm gonna try to talk like as if I actually love what I'm reading in the Bhagavatam, that I'm gonna talk like in that way, like in the sense that I'm gonna try to inculcate those ideas, like
Uh-huh.
those things, that
Mm-hmm.
same energy, that spirit, no, what you learn with the
Mm-hmm.
Bhagavad, you got to inculcate that when I'm talking to others also. And that makes a huge difference, because when you do
Okay.
that, so then you kind of you realize there's a big you realize that everything is actually very temporary. It's not like, it's not so important to it's like, what is the big deal, like, for your identity and this, that, and all that. So that is what I like, but that happens when you are like, when you read the Bhagavatam for a long time, then suddenly you're like, there are various examples of when people discuss things in a very like degraded way, like in a very like, just, there's no substance to anything. It's just simply, you're just talking, saying something, and then, but then when you put in that substance behind the talk, no, not like, not
Mm-hmm.
saying not saying like Krishna's name or anything like that and all that, but just, you know talking in the same spirit, let's say, then it makes a huge difference, like in your own mind, like, it'll make a big difference in the
I
whole
think
thing.
from what you're saying, what you're sharing, I think one is that you realize that your own taste has changed. Is that
uh,
what you're saying? Earlier, you were happy to do that degraded verbal exchange or little insult, come little boy, tomfoolery or whatever. Now you're saying your taste has changed, and not only that, you want in some way to introduce what benefit and that spirit you're getting by reading the Bhagavatam. Somewhere you want to, not maybe in a very rough or slamming way, because that will be counterproductive.
mm.
But actually, if you learn to be spiritually very alert, you can introduce that, like you correctly said, the spirit of the Bhagavatam into any mundane material situation without their even being aware of it. You
So that
just
I've
have to know.
noticed. I've noticed that even with you, Supriya Chechi, like you are able to like amongst a lot of other people that I've come across, no, the amount of knowledge that you have is like very as a lot. So I really commend your,
No, 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 not
a lot of respect for your for the
no.
level of knowledge that you have.
No, Kannan, I don't think that is true. But what actually is a little true is I have learned from others to remain very alert so that a person may be talking about something completely material, but you can see a small opening that somewhere they are searching for something, and you keep that in mind. In your next interaction, you can introduce a spiritual a principle or just a story or share an experience. That bit I agree. I think somehow I have developed that quality. So often I
But
keep up. Yeah,
but that is
go on.
also because but that's also because of the amount of spiritual knowledge that you have now. It's also about
Uh,
the amount of knowledge that you've accrued, and also the fact that you're able to discriminate between the good and bad thoughts that exist. You know that your ability to do that is very good actually, because I don't see
yes,
that with a lot of people. Like even people of like let's say your age also. Like I don't see that with many people. Like
I
it's
guess
very unique.
no. I guess Kannan. One thing is that I managed these last 20 years really through although I was very much I'm part of a family and have my duties and my privileges and everything from them. I managed to make the study of scripture and the teaching, and you can say a lot of spiritual experiences. I was fortunate that that was practically like my only career. That
Hmm.
doesn't is not always the best option, and it's often not possible. But just the way I am in a female body and I am the only surviving child of my parents and so on, I had already achieved materially. So they just let me make my choice, that okay, she must know what she wants best. And in the process, the whole family also got saved. Like when I heard about this lady and her the loss of three members at one shot like this, I was really, like you say, I was shell shocked for about a couple of days when I heard her case. She's still alive and she's functioning, because the loss of one family member, it has taken us at least 15, 20 years to try to drag ourselves back to normalcy. This lady has to function with three people gone. So, if you look around, there are people who've done a much better job of their karmic mess than I have or we have. But it also I am aware of that is that people always need help to equip themselves, even if tragedy doesn't strike in their family, equip themselves to help others, and they should arm and equip and yeah, like armaments are hoarded. This whole Ukraine crisis, now Russia is going to get from somewhere else and Ukraine is going to get help from somewhere else. We actually at our level we should, like, spiritual armaments we should hold and keep, because even if tragedy doesn't strike and mess up our life, we should be there for others, because that is the kind of service that God really, Krishna really appreciates. He really, really appreciates when you are able to serve others. So chapter 12, just to get back to this, sorry, verse 12 of
Well,
chapter 5. Yeah, one is of course this clue why peace is not possible on the material level. You watch a lot of material. I love certain movies are my favorites, and I can keep seeing them again and again. Certain literature, but why it still doesn't leaves you with a sense of uneasiness and fear is because on the material platform, everything is shifting and changing and temporary, and we are really hankering for something that will last, because basically we are spirit souls. That's our identity, and that is eternal. So when something may just slip out of our hands, we are anxious and fearful, and in such a situation, peace is not possible. The second point to squeeze out of this particular verse is that there are three doers. There is we as the jiva, there is
hmm.
material nature that makes all the facilities, and there is the Lord who has to sanction whether we are going to do something wrong or not. This is where, when we make Krishna our friend, he leaves, he's watching all the time. This chapter, though it is abstract and philosophical, has some three very good analogies. One of them is a small, simple analogy that comes up in a later verse in a purport. is how he is there, like you can smell a flower by putting it near your nose. The Paramatma inside can smell the desires that are passing through our heart, bad and good, stinky ones and good ones. So he's constantly there as Sakshi, witness. You know what we want to do, what we are thinking of doing, what we may avoid doing, and he keeps giving us a little independence to make our own choice. And he is watching and rewarding accordingly. So there are three doers. There is we, there is material nature, because once Krishna is watching, under Krishna's order, under the Supreme Lord's order, material nature starts making those facilities. You want to do something sinful, suddenly you find that basically that sinful, the opportunity to do something to eat or do or drink or do something really horrible and illicit is there. But the choice is still with you whether to do it or not. The ultimate, so therefore you alone are the cause of your own misery. That is the theme that is being opened up here in chapter 5. Who is responsible for the jiva suffering? The jiva alone is responsible, though there are other actors in the background drama. And how do we come to a position where we are not fearful and we are always seeing that Krishna is the ultimate doer? The first stepping stone for that is to understand that there is a body and there is a soul. The two have got mixed up, obviously, but we are really spirit, soul, and we are not the body. So what suffering comes through the body, by extension, even the mind. Someone says something hurtful to you, even if it is a kind of a young, youthful zest to something insulting. As long as we realize we are not this body, we ought not to be reacting. When we forget that and we think our body and mind is most important, we suffer some hurt, we keep it in our mind, we brood over it, then and so on. So the way out is to understand that we are basically to understand the difference between spirit and body. Now, verse 13 is another lovely analogy, really beautiful analogy. That is, it is treating the body as a city of 9 gates, and the jiva or the spirit soul as somebody who's living inside or who is the master of the city of 9 gates. Now, why are these 9 gates important? You go to the next verse. That is 13. Verse 13. Verse 13. Yeah, that's right. Verse 13 of chapter 5. Yeah, just read this verse. It's a short translation.
So, when the embodied living when the embodied living beings control his nature and mentally renounces all actions, he resides happily in the city of 9 gates. That's the material body, neither working nor causing work to be done.
Okay.
So,
yeah. Look, the embodied soul lives in the city of 9 gates. What are these 9 gates? Basically, it is the Navadwara, so the holes through which information, knowledge, activities take place. 2 eyes, 2 ears, mouth, nostrils, nose, and then the genitals. That's how it goes. So it's a total of 9. Why this analogy is really important is as we practice more and more, when we start practicing, there are so many do's and don'ts even in Bhakti Yoga. For example, in ISKCON, we tell people, don't watch TV too much, don't read the newspaper too much, don't do this, don't do that. So it's kind of big pain. Why should I not watch TV and why should I not read? And naturally, a lot of us even rebel. What you will see 5, 10, 15 years down the lane is this is the reason, because the gates in a city, the gates are guarded carefully, and who is in charge of the city, say the Raja, he has a right to control what comes in and what goes out. Right? So similarly, you will come to a stage of maturity where if you value your inner consciousness and mental peace, you are not going to allow any trash and any rubbish to come in through your ears, eyes, nose, food, whatever. Not only that we become more regulated, we value the internal condition of the city. And here I don't mean just the body and the digestion, but I mean basically that's important, but I mean the consciousness. So why should you have to read pages and pages of the messes of people, of big crooks who the police are now running after? Open the newspaper, that's all there is. A fraud, corruption, crookedness, people gone missing after doing fraud. Those are still small columns. You know, the major headlines are all about people who are basically being pushed or being inspired by Rajoguna and Tamoguna, if not worse. These are our big leaders today, mostly. And these are the big kind of mega events that are happening. So why should you, when you're working so hard to internally become peaceful, why should you allow such trash? The beginning we are told, don't waste your time reading too much of that. And we often even kind of we resent that. Why should my freedom be taken away? I'll watch what I like, I'll read what I like. Much later, you come to a position where you realize that if you're guarding your body and your mind as a city of nine gates, you'll be very particular who you associate with, whose nonsense you're willing to listen to, what rubbish food you're willing to or not willing to eat and put inside because it's going to go and cause acidity and cause so many other issues. Even karmic reactions, if it has involved the killing of innocent creatures. This awareness, this is a great analogy to work with, great, because the nine gates, it's all of them you may not be able to guard, but really you come to a position where if someone else is constantly making a mess of their life, why the hell should that be dumped on me? And why do I have to keep on hearing all these WhatsApp messages? You come to that awareness. Tell them to make a success of things. They have so much to be grateful for. If they need help, I will give them help. This awareness is really the awareness of the Navadwara, the city of nine gates. They have now begun treating even this temporary material body that can perish any time, that as a city of nine gates, and we are guarding what is allowed into the city and what is allowed out of the city. It's a great analogy to work with. And this is coming not from Prabhupada, it's basically coming from Krishna himself. See, the Supreme Personality of Godhead also, who is living within the body of a living entity, is a controller. But the body itself here, as you say, consists of nine gates. But two nostrils.
Two eyes, no nostrils, 2 ears, 1 mouth, the anus and genitals.
Yeah.
Okay.
So when he, and see this last bit, when he identifies himself with the Lord within himself, he becomes just as free as the Lord even while in the body. In that situation, you not only don't allow anything to come, anything unnecessary and rubbishy to come in, should it come in unavoidable, you don't get affected. The example is given of a TV blaring rubbish stuff. Okay, there is a stage where you say, can you turn off the TV? I'm not able to concentrate. Can you please reduce the volume? There is a much higher stage which is rarely achieved at our levels, at my level, where the TV may go on, some rubbish, but you are really not affected at all because you have already focusing internally. You are not much affected by what's happening.
The best example of this is Jada Bharata, no? He's the best example. He's the best example because after 2 lives of like being in 2 lives and all stuff, he realizes that he's already born in that Brahmin family, already like enlightened, no, in that sense. Like he's already realized Krishna is the supreme God, but he's born in a Brahmin family in the second life or the third life, and in that, like he's the whole like he's treated so badly even by his own family, his own Brahmin family, like treats him so badly. Like they have all these traditions and customs and all stuff, but he's so beyond that. He's only thinking about Krishna the whole time, not thinking about all these ceremonies and traditions and all that stuff. And as a Brahmin, he's supposed to by heart all the verses, learn everything. Is that he's like, but he's already so his father keeps teaching him all these, tries to teach him all this stuff, but he doesn't learn because he's already spiritually advanced. He's already thinking of Krishna the whole time, so he doesn't need all this. And then the minute his father dies, the rest of the other family members, they're like, okay, this is an opportunity, let's throw him out because now there's nobody else here to save him or to keep him here in the house. So then he's left alone. Basically, he's on his own, and then he accepts anything that comes his way. Like somebody tells him, you go to the field and scare away the crows and the pigs and stuff. He's like, yeah, okay, fine, I'll do that. So he does that. Then some people kidnap him, and they are followers of the Kalima, and then they try to kill him as a sacrifice. And then Kalima is like, she comes from that what do you say, that stone that breaks, and then she comes and she kills all. She gets angry because you're like, this person's like they're trying to kill this person who's so devoted to Krishna, like so then she kills all the other people. Now again, he's like just wandering around. Somebody tells him, you become a palanquin carrier. He's like, he's just standing there. They're like, okay, this person is just standing there. he looks kind of strong. So bring him. Let him carry this king on his shoulder and all that. So then he comes there, carries the king on his shoulder, but then he's too afraid to like walk because there are ants on the ground. So he doesn't want to step on the ants. So then the king gets upset. And so then he tells the
Right.
king, like, your this what you identify as this with this material world will soon go away, and you will no longer be this king that you think of. So people, and the
Mm.
whole time people don't realize that he's a Brahmin. Now in the Bhagavatam they say that if you insult a Brahmin or if you kill a Brahmin, then it's
A
considered a
terrible
sin.
fate. And
Something will
there's a
happen to you. Yeah,
particular hell
and
which is waiting
but
for him
none
to
of
go.
these,
Yeah.
but none of these people who were had any clue that he was a Brahmin because of how he dressed and how he looked and all that stuff. So like they didn't realize the sin they were committing. And so then when that person realized, then he taught him all this stuff. And even then also he was just like he didn't care. Like he moved away, and then like there's I don't know if it's his story, but I think it's a story where he doesn't want to be in touch with anybody. So he takes his own urine and like crap, and then he covers the entire body so that other people don't come to him, so that they don't
So
come close to him.
that is Rishabhadev in his very
Ah,
elevated condition.
that's
Rishabhadev.
Rishabhadev.
This,
Okay, okay.
but this person, this
Ah,
personality, this what you are saying, Bharat, this Jada Bharat,
hmm.
is also very interesting. The king
Yeah, he
involved
also
here is
does it.
Rahuguna. Rahuguna. Okay, the
Raguna.
king. But Jada Bharat is interesting because he used a strategy. He, from childhood, he pretended to be a dumb idiot. You
Ah,
see,
yeah.
that is why when his father who cared for him, tried to
Because
train him
he,
as a Brahmin.
yeah. Hmm.
Say after you've eaten, wash your hand. What he would do it, he would wash his hand and then eat and not wash. Deliberately, he would bungle up all the instructions. Why? It is actually a good strategy that he used because
Hmm.
he knew that if he came across as a normal, intelligent Brahmin child of a Brahmin, a society would catch hold of him and send him on a particular mainstream track, which doesn't give that much scope for spiritual realization. And having made blunder twice, once and then as a deer, he was determined that in this lifetime he would really get fully God realized. So he painted himself out as a dumb fool, and he that was a very good disguise.
A
So
good
people just
strategy, like
good strategy. People,
because people will be like he's useless, he doesn't know anything, and so they would
yes,
keep away from him. They'll say he's mad also. So then he kind of wants that to happen. He wants people to think that
yes,
he's mad, so that he can like just practice Krishna consciousness on his own and sit on his
right,
own
yeah.
and just keep thinking of Krishna the whole time. And then yeah, that's it.
Yeah, and it made me have a rethink about the backbenchers in our school classrooms. You know, the backbenchers, because we just presume that the people who are coming first and who are, in the front row,
Uh,
well, naturally, that's the normal understanding. But some of the backbenchers have done very unusual things. Of course, materially, you
I
have case, is it Bill Gates?
I've been a backbencher, middle bencher, and front bencher my entire life. I didn't really like
Oh, hmm.
it.
I
I
was,
never. I used to always when I sit in the back, no, I used to be like all these people in the front. They just want to like they want to show off. That's what they want to do. When you sit in the
hmm,
front, no, you're always thinking like that you're always thinking like you're always competing with the other person who's sitting in the front. So like life would be so much more easier if I just sat in the back than sitting in the front. Why sit in the front unnecessarily? This way, I've sat in the front because various instances I thought I want to show the teacher or show this person that I am very learned, or I'm like I know I'm paying attention on stuff. But
right,
then
right,
I realized very quickly that the teacher also knows whether you sit in the front or you don't sit in the front. The teacher knows that whether you're paying attention or not. So I was like, it
right, right.
doesn't make any difference. I'll just sit in the back because
Right, yeah.
it's much easier, like sitting in the back and all that.
Mm. Yeah, because the backbenchers, some of them, we don't know. I mean, where they ended up or whether they did something unusual with their lives. So King Rahuguna was the one who came in contact with Jada Bharat, but Jada Bharat was trying to be like a backbencher. In our language and our generation times,
Hmm.
it's someone who is not willing to conform to expectations of success, etc., mainstream success. And in that way, he saved himself. So eventually, like you said, he really preaches and explains to King Rahuguna, who bows down and asks for apology, etc. And but even better example is from the fifth canto of Priyavrata Maharaj, who had no desire to get into material life. But because his father, Swayambhu Manu came and said to carry on the progeny line, you just have to. And Narada Muni was not happy because Narada Muni was kind of claiming as a proper disciple, so spiritually advanced. Priyavrata Maharaj. Eventually, Brahma had to intervene. Brahma, whose grandson was Priyavrata Maharaj, had to intervene and explain that there is a way to do your material duties. That's what's been taught in chapter 5. Krishna is saying all this so that Arjuna will still fight as a Kshatriya. So Priyavrata Maharaj in Canto 5, basically he is forced to, after being so advanced spiritually, he's forced to like revert, do a U-turn and simply to obey the instructions of Swayambhu Manu. And then Narada Muni, his spiritual guru, is hovering in the background, not very happy to give off his, set aside his claim of a very brilliant disciple. And then Brahma comes on his swan and settles the matter once and for all. If I remember correctly, why Swayambhu Manu is forced to do this is because I think the 4 Kumaras refused, they would celibate. Yeah, the Kumaras, they decide to remain celibate. They refuse to marry and have children and carry on the family line. So Swayambhu Manu is, if I remember, unless I'm confusing 2 different things, Swayambhu Manu is forced to look for someone else. That is how he goes and makes a claim on his own progeny, that is Priyavrata Maharaj. So Priyavrata Maharaj is forced to take on the role of a
Prajapati.
No, he's forced to take on the role of a householder. He is an yeah, but it's also true, again, I hope I'm not confusing things, doesn't he get married to Purva Chitti? The Purva Chitti is a very beautiful damsel.
I need to go back to the 5th canto and see what is it like. I kind of
many years he is very much in that Maya lokam. Then somehow he snaps out of it and goes back on a celestial planet and leads Agnidra. I'm not sure about the Purvachitti, whether it is Agnidra, his son, who got fascinated by Purvachitti, or it was Priyavrata himself. But Priyavrata Maharaj was basically asked to do something he was not willing to do, which is to come back and work on a material platform. But he was largely able to do it very successfully because he was able to work in this consciousness. That is, internally remembering that the Supreme Lord is the only shelter and so only doer and the only controller, and therefore never running after the results of his activities. So for chapter 5, for these verses, how to act in that kind of consciousness, is Priyavrata Maharaj from Canto 5 is a very good example. So you will have verse 12 here, and we have verse 13 here, where the city of the 9 gates, the analogy is given. And we are also told how the Lord can smell our desires like we can smell a flower by just holding it to our nose. Text 15 also is pretty crucial to this chapter, text 15. And text 15 is again answering that underlying thematic question in this whole chapter, and it will come up again in later chapters of the Bhagavad Gita, which is who is responsible for the jiva suffering. Is it God who you can blame? Is it circumstances? This is a tricky one, because big time criminals, big time murderers, we say it was circumstances. He was driven beyond endurance. It's true. We try to alleviate their suffering and make them materially well situated so they won't repeat a crime which they did for money and for survival. That's there. But if you look at the karmic account book, there has to be the desire, then material nature, the circumstances, and finally there is the sanctioner. So it's a tricky thing. It will be impossible to explain this in a modern law court. And traditionally, if you have done a crime, they tell you better in this lifetime to finish paying for the crime and to move on. Now, that kind of logic won't go down well at all in today's scenario, because here we are thinking in today's scenario, they don't see anything beyond this life and this life.
Yeah, like in there's this part, right, in that in the story of Jamil, where he's where those Vishnu Dutas and the Yamraj, the Yamadutas come, and when they are talking to Yamraj, they tell him that Yamraj tells them that, like, the Vishnu Duta, right, even though, like, he did all these bad things throughout his life. I mean, all impious things or whatever throughout his life. He still remembered God at the end of his life. So, but he says like he also says in that where he says like even people who have done the worst crimes also, like who've committed like the worst amount of murders and rapes or whatever it is,
Yeah.
in today's time this kind of thing obviously like people won't accept it, where he says that even they are can change and can realize God, and they can also go to heaven, or they can also get to a better
Sure.
place. They can also get, so that is something that in today's time nobody will accept.
Okay. Just one thing, Siddharth. Here we are talking at cross purposes. We are saying two different
Hmm.
things. One, what you're saying is fundamentally sound and correct, that there is
Hmm.
hope even for the worst sin. What I am saying is that in answer to the question, who is responsible for the jiva suffering, I am
Hmm.
saying that the traditional Vedic and Shastric understanding was finally you alone. So, supposing say I committed a murder, right? Now, it's true that Krishna sitting, who could smell my negative desire in my heart, sanctioned that I want to do this terrible murder. And then somehow I found the circumstances. I was alone with the victim. There was a knife lying, some weapon which I improvised and finished. So I am alone responsible. The traditional understanding tells you pay up and get done with the karmic reaction. So traditionally, thousands of years ago, when these systems were intact, I would have gone and probably my head would have been chopped off, or what is called capital punishment. I finished paying off, and the my Atma would have just moved on to another body and starting practically with a clean slate. Now, in today's day and age, nobody will support capital punishment because and it is probably not fair at all, because there is so much inequity and there is so much reason why crimes are happening, so much unfair exploitations of poor, wretchedly poor people, that one can't blame them for doing crimes. There is so much suffering in their lives. So we have to use this logic a little carefully when we say you alone, the jiva alone is responsible for their suffering. You see, somebody does a crime and finds themselves on death row. You cannot go up and say you alone are responsible for your suffering, because there are so many circumstantial factors which made the person maybe do that crime, and they are probably repeating some horrible crime that they saw done. So many complex factors are there. But fundamentally, in the karmic passbook, in terms of debit and credit, and from Krishna's perspective, the point that is being made here is that in the afterlife, we alone have to take responsibility for the wrong that we have done, because it all comes down to desires. Now, how do you save a person who's done a horrible crime? You uplift and alleviate their consciousness and mentality in such a way that they stop desiring wrong criminal desires. That is the way really to help them. In that sense, what you're saying is 100% correct. There is hope even for the worst sinner. There is hope
Hmm.
even for such a person to go back to heavenly planets or to go back to the Lord himself. So, but if from a karmic passbook perspective, credit and debit, we alone are responsible for the mess we create. And once we start turning to Krishna and start connecting in some way, he gives us intelligence by which we can make choices, avoid doing horrible and sinful activities. We start uplifting ourselves. You get me? You get the point?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So here, in chapter verse 15 is again crucially important, because Krishna is making it very clear. I will not accept any of your sinful acts or reactions. I just won't accept it at all. So, and somewhere here, there's also a very good analogy of a lotus leaf and the water falling off it. I think we already shot past it. Uh, Patra Pushpam
Mm.
Ivambasa. Patra Pushpam, yeah, that was verse 10.
Oh,
Padma Patram Ivambasa, the second sentence in verse 10. We shot past it.
in
That was another very good
yeah.
analogy.
Okay, yeah, the one who performs the duty without attachment, surrendering the results unto the Supreme Lord, is unaffected by sinful action as the lotus leaf is untouched by water.
Okay, so this is really like advice to Arjuna, that you can fight, but you don't have to worry about getting meshed up,
Hmm.
enmeshed in sinful reactions for killing your cousins, for killing your elders, etc., because you are acting according to my desire and you are acting according to your nature, which is the Kshatriya, which is basically to fight and do your duty. You are acting with good reason because the Kauravas refused to allow you to do your duty, the Pandavas of ruling. And so you're forced to fight, go to war to get back some kingdom to rule. So how do you do all this? Or how did Priyavrata Maharaj, when he was suddenly asked to give up his spiritual track and come back to work in a material household situation, you do it like the lotus leaf is there and water may be splashed on it, but the drop of water just rolls off the leaf. So the leaf really never gets wet. That's the whole point. And there is a consciousness in which you can do all these things, do completely material things. It's very difficult to accomplish that. You can have a household, you can be responsible, you can earn money, you can be a father of children, you can be a husband or wife of, and still not be affected by anything. Actually, very difficult, but it is possible. You can be like the lotus leaf on which water falls, but the water just rolls off it. There's another proverb, learning to catch fish without getting wet. This is, if you see a fisherman standing and catching fish, it's very hard to not get wet, because at least when you draw in the fish line,
that water comes in the body and all that.
Yeah, water will definitely, the fish will kind of struggle, and then somehow in the whole procedure, you also get wet. But apparently there is a way you can catch fish without getting wet. And that is the kind of consciousness that is being recommended for someone who can remain. You doesn't have to renounce material duties. That's the whole point of this chapter. You do your material duty. What you renounce is the attachment to the results. Okay, so now that we missed that lovely analogy. Now in verse 15, Krishna is saying very clearly, this is that same theme, who is responsible for the suffering of the living entity. The living entity alone is responsible, because the Supreme Lord is just a sanctioner. The original initiating cause of all the suffering is the desires from the living entity, and often sinful desires means it's going to come to end in suffering. And Lord is making it very clear, like, sometimes a parent takes a very tough stand and says, you do what you like, you start this business, I am not in favor of it at all. And if your business flops, don't think that I am going to bail you out and give you money once the business gets bust or your project goes bust. He is taking that kind of tough line here, because Krishna is saying very categorically, not as the Supreme Lord assume anyone's sinful or pious activities. Embodied beings, that is you and me, living beings, however, are bewildered because of the ignorance which covers their real knowledge. Okay, so the Supreme Lord is not, we have a tendency when things go wrong to blame and say, this is not my fault, it's all, what a cruel and unfair and unjust God I've been praying to. And it takes some time before we bring our thinking back on track and say that can't be. It can't be. Something goes horribly wrong, and so nor does the Supreme Lord assume anyone's sinful or pious activities. He is not going to take credit for something pious, nor is he going to take your sinfulness. Why do we do sinful things? Because the ignorance which covers our real knowledge, which makes us turn away from our real Father or the real reality, and so we suffer. Here, if you see this long purport, there's another lovely analogy coming up towards the end of this purport. It's not there in the original Sanskrit, but it's given here. Look at the purport. You want to read the purport?
This one?
The purport.
This one?
Yeah, that's the last bit, but you just start from the beginning, the Sanskrit word Vibhu. Yeah.
So the Sanskrit word Vibhu means the Supreme Lord, who is full of unlimited knowledge, riches, strength, fame, beauty, and renunciation. He's always satisfied. Yeah.
1 second. These 6 qualities that are listed here are the 6 Aishwaryas of the Lord. is supposed to have full knowledge, full enriches of Krishna particularly. The other deities have many of these, but in lesser quantity. We human beings may also have this, but in much smaller quantity. But for the Supreme Lord, who is full of these Aishwaryas, unlimited knowledge, riches, strength, fame, beauty, and renunciation. Okay, carry on.
He is always satisfied in himself, undisturbed by sinful or pious activities. He does not create a particular situation for any living entity, but the living entity, bewildered by ignorance, desires to be put into certain conditions of life, and thereby his chain of action and reaction begins. A living entity is by superior nature full of knowledge, nevertheless, he is prone to be influenced by ignorance due to his limited power. The Lord is omnipotent, but the living entity is not. The Lord is Vibhu or omniscient, but the living entity is Anu or atomic.
Okay, just hold it for 1 minute. This omniscient is as important as omnipotent. Omniscient means all knowing. So I may know what's going on inside my mind. And to an extent, to the extent to which I know another person, I may guess what's going on in their mind. But the Lord is omniscient. So being sitting there as super soul in everybody's inside everyone's heart, he knows exactly what each individual is desiring, hankering after. So this omniscience is a very important quality to logically understand how come he knows, how come he can smell, like the smell of a flower, he can smell my desire. Okay, so that's how he is. Okay, the living entity, go on, because he is a living,
because he is a living soul, he has a capacity to desire by his free will. Such desires fulfilled only by omnipotent Lord, and so when the living entity is bewildered in his desires, the Lord also allows him to fulfill those desires. But the Lord is never responsible for the actions and reactions of the particular situation which may be desired. Being in a bewildered condition, therefore, the embodied soul identifies himself with the circumstantial material body and becomes subjected to the temporary misery and happiness of life. The Lord is the constant companion of the living entity. As you are saying,
no, go on. As Paramatma.
The Lord is a constant companion of the living entity as Paramatma or the super soul, and therefore he can understand the desires of the individual soul as one can smell the flavor of a flower by being near it.
Okay, just hold on. Again, in what you've just read, two really important points. One is that there is some free will given to the living entity. There is free will. We should never think that it's all fated and all predestined. It's saying very clearly here that some free will is given. Because he is a living soul, he has the capacity to desire by his free will. The other point is that the Lord is a constant companion of the living entity as Paramatma. This is again life after life. So he even knows the nonsense and the good things you've done in a previous life. And accordingly, he sanctions and guides. That he, for example, he may know that in Jada Bharat, the Paramatma inside Jada Bharat very well knew that the mistake that was made which made Bharat Maharaj end up as a deer. And he knows that as a deer how much he repented. So Jada Bharat, the Lord is constantly traveling with him and giving him the intelligence and suggestions to make a success of things finally in this third birth. Okay, the Lord is the constant companion of the Param. Okay, smell like the smell of a flower. The Lord fulfills his desire as he deserves. Man proposes, God disposes. The individual is not therefore omnipotent in fulfilling his desire. The Lord has to fulfill. That is, he has to sanction. But when one desires Krishna, the Lord takes special care to bring you to Krishna. If you want to go away from Krishna, this goes further down. You don't have to go into the Vedic hymn, but the second last para at the end of the purport, it says the living. If you scroll down, keep scrolling down. Okay, correct here. The living entity is completely dependent in his distress and happiness. Just read that.
Yeah, the living entity is completely dependent in his distress and happiness. By the will of the Supreme, he can go to heaven or hell, as a cloud is driven by the air. Therefore,
therefore.
Okay, therefore, the embodied soul, by his immemorial desire to avoid Krishna consciousness, causes his own bewilderment. Consequently, although he is constitutionally eternal, blissful, and cognizant, due to the littleness of his existence, he forgets his constitutional position of service to the Lord and is thus entrapped by nescience. And under the spell of ignorance, the living entity claims that the Lord is responsible for his conditional existence. The Vedanta Sutra also confirms this. Vaishamya nargaranye na sapekshatvat tata hi darshati.
Yeah.
The Lord neither hates nor likes anyone, though he appears to.
Okay. So this is just saying very categorically that we desire, the Lord sanctions, material nature facilitates our desire according to what we have desired. And this analogy of like a cloud is driven by air, meaning when you look at the sky, the cloud is really helpless. It can't do very much on its own. So we are jivas. Also, we can go to heaven or to hell. We have a little bit of free will. We can exercise that free will and desire the right things. The Lord automatically, impartially grants, and material nature facilitates our good activities and our sinful activities. Like people say, I really wanted to attend some program, excuse me, or attend some kirtan, and everything was against me. It was not possible. But because the desire was there, and we say, oh, guess what? There is a hartal tomorrow, so I don't have to go for work. I can just sit at home and listen to the kirtan mela on Mayapur TV live whole day. So where are these arrangements coming from? We take all this for granted, and we use words like fluke and luck and by coincidence. Nothing happens just by luck and fluke and coincidence. Of course, it is fortune, but because someone is sitting there hearing and making these things possible, it is really a fact what's being said here. So many times people with devotional inclination say, I was really hoping I can go for the parikrama. I was really hoping I can go for this. But then, my work, there's no way I can get leave. I at least wanted to hear the first day because Agni Dev is performing. There is a particular singer or Bada Hari Das or some names like that. But no chance. There's no way I can get leave. And then really somehow circumstances come around in such a way that they don't have to work on that particular day and they're able to hear. I'm just giving one example. There are hundreds of such examples. Over the time, we find that the Lord is providing everything we want. So everything that, although the Bhagavad Gita is very ABC, my Shiksha Guru Purnachandra Swami would advise that, of course, one must go into the Bhagavatam and so on, but never leave the platform of the Bhagavad Gita, simply because everything that Krishna promises in the Bhagavad Gita, he actually fulfills. He really fulfills. So we should not move away from that safe foundation. We should just go deeper and deeper and understand more and more, because that way the faith in our hearts will get more and more nourished, the faith in Krishna. Of course, the other way is to read the stories in the Bhagavatam, because you are seeing here people in whose lives these things are happening. That way, when a jiva is moving from complete darkness, like what do? We suddenly find the current is gone and we are trapped inside a dark room. First thing, we use some source of light like a candle or a torch. We flash it here and there and start seeing our way, right? But when the sun rises the next morning, there's complete illumination. So our process from a position of ignorance and darkness to full enlightenment is very much like this. The torches that we are using are the stories of the Bhagavatam, the promises in the Bhagavad Gita, the study and hearing and the chanting. These are torches here and there. We flash it. We may even flash it on ourselves and say, hey, I look different now. I'm a different person from 5 years ago and so on. But then externally also some beacon of light has to come, which is usually in the form of a guru, Shiksha Guru, Diksha Guru, and so on, because he gives even more enlightenment. But eventually, when the sun of complete knowledge or realization starts to rise from within our own heart, it is at an advanced stage where we are no longer dependent on the torches and the candle and even maybe external sunlight, because from within, Krishna is granting complete realization and knowledge. So Jada had very much reached a position like that. He was not affected by the kicking of King Rahuguna on his shoulder, but the taunting of the other palanquin carriers and all those other things that you mentioned. But the other Maharaj who, like Rishabdev, he was finally he was withdrawing so much from the world, but spiritually going inward and inward. That I have read all this, a stool and urine and rolling in it and appearing like a madman and people. And later you have also an example in the later cantos of the Bhagavatam, the Avanti Brahmin. The Avanti Brahmin had done a lot of sinful things, and later some his fortune, he was very mean and miserly, unlike King Rishabdev. But and Avanti Brahmin also goes through a situation where he loses all his money. Nobody, people only remember the horrible things he had done to them. So they spit on him and urinate on him, and he's lying there, no food, no bath water to bathe. But he accepts it as a karmic reaction he's getting for all the horrible things he did. This is also a very advanced level. So if we can teach ourselves to look back on our own lives, see where we are coming from, to see how at what stage we got activated or got started on this spiritual quest, identify milestones, then it becomes easier to see where we are going and what we need to do. It's very helpful to do this. Look at these cases like Jada Bharat. Now, when Bhagavatam is being written from his, not in his voice, we were told how he started as a Bharat Maharaj who had very good intentions, went to the forest, then took birth as a deer because of his attachment to that mother deer and the baby deer. And then he is born again. So even if we can't look back into past lifetimes, that is impossible. That's beyond us. But in this lifetime, you can definitely see watersheds and milestones. That I was a real fool or really ignorant. I had such sinful proclivities or tendencies in those years. Even if I didn't have the courage to do that sin myself because I was born in a decent family, I very much used to float more towards the failures and the flops and the people who cheated in exams or the people who never studied and people who bad company. I can look back. So that was really me as the jiva coming out of some confusion from a previous life. But something happened, something got activated, and I wanted to improve, and then Krishna really started reciprocating. So it is kind of self-honesty. Even if we don't splash it like now it is a trend, if we look into ourselves and look back, we can help ourselves much more. How much it helps, how inspiring the Jada Bharat story is, how inspiring the mistake he made, very genuine, that a pregnant she deer is being chased by a tiger, desperation, she jumps over the river. I think the she deer dies, but that pregnancy ends in delivery and that baby deer, the fawn comes. How can you not feel sympathy or pathos? Even that's fine. But then to get so carried away that Bharat Maharaj, alone from his family support, is now diverting all his affection only onto that baby deer. So that even
that happens when you're like when suddenly you leave your entire family and go and try to become like in Krishna consciousness. You leave everything behind. So now the body still the mind is still attached to like some kind of familial attachment or something like. So he's like he sees he sees it as an opportunity to like he's probably thinking in his mind at that time that I left my family to do this, but this deer is there. If I can't go back to my family, at least I can take care of this deer. So this deer is a substitute for like the family and all that stuff. So that's there. It's,
like you're saying, there is so much that one can squeeze out of these stories in the Bhagavatam, these incidents, really, because he becomes so deluded. The great Bharat Maharaj, who had, so deluded that he starts thinking that the land on which the baby deer, the fawn has walked and which has left its improvements is special. It is like holy, sacred. Normally, you think of that if the Lord has walked there or some devotees have walked there. He becomes so much covered by delusion. These are real lessons. How the mind can trick us, our own mind, how it can trick us into believing something to be which is not like that at all, and to act upon it. So absolutely. And then the next life that he gets is the deer, because of his sincerity, what I have read either in the Bhagavatam or in a commentary.
Yeah, so he like because of his because of also the fact is that like he was for a lot of his life he was dedicated to the service of Krishna. So that
Absolutely.
though there is obviously like a lot of good karma that he had accrued in his life, even despite the fact that, his attachment to the, even then his attachment to the deer was not out of some kind of like malicious attachment or anything like that. It was a loving attachment still existed. So then his next life, when he was born with he could remember his previous life. So as a deer, he knew that even though he was born as a deer, he knew all the things that he did in his previous life. And he knew that where he made the mistake was that he got attached to this deer. And I think in that deer became when he became a king, because that deer was also attached to the king. So I
Right.
think I think that happens. I think the deer also gets attached to the king, and then
I
the deer
see.
becomes a king. And so
King.
then
I see.
now and that's why he becomes a deer. So he's born, like the deer mother is like gives him the birth, and then after that he just like leaves the deer mother and then goes to the same forest where he was meditating and all that stuff.
And the
And
sages near an
yeah.
ashram where the sages are there.
Hmm.
What I heard in a class was two things that are remarkable. One is that even when he takes birth as a deer, like you said, he's situated in that same forest area and
Hmm.
some ascetic for ashram. That's one thing. So
Uh,
he gets to float around near. And other thing is, though he's in a deer's body, this I heard in a good class, that he is able to understand the dialogue of the sages.
yeah,
He can't
he's able to understand
talk.
correct.
He
Yeah.
couldn't talk that human language, Sanskrit or whatever it was, but he could follow and grasp everything. So he gets more and more enlightened,
So
even though he's a deer.
he's a deer. So even in that life, I mean, he gets enlightenment. I mean, he becomes enlightened, but because he's in the body of a deer,
Yeah,
this they say that okay, that's the reason why he's in the next life he's born as a human being, where he's like in a brown family, but by the time he's born already, he's already
yeah,
like spiritually enlightened, and so because of that, like yeah, his whole life goes. But then, what the story also shows, like in my perspective, like how society like how they have different like biases and all that stuff, like
prejudices.
prejudices and biases and all that stuff, and they so quickly like without thinking people will just put their biases onto other people, and they will discriminate very quickly. They'll discriminate against other people and stuff. I've noticed, like, so his stories like is very interesting and sometimes inspiring also, because like it's kind of like Jesus Christ in some ways if you think about
Right,
it.
right.
Like
Yeah,
in the Jada Bharat is almost like Christ in one way, because he was like like people, I mean, Christ also, I mean,
it
like
is
if
the suffering inflicted upon
suffering,
him. It is
yeah, yeah,
suffering inflicted.
the
Yeah.
amount of suffering inflicted upon him and he didn't take it and stuff like that. I mean, Christ is like but in his case, like he also didn't like in the case of Jadabath, he didn't like, people are constantly attacking him, like insulting him, hurting him physically, but he didn't take any he didn't
Offense. Offense.
offense,
Mhm.
nothing. So that is quite inspiring. It's like a very high level of
Very high
awareness.
level. And other thing to notice is like it's a combination of Jadabharat deciding to act stupid and foolish to save himself, and the Lord making certain arrangements for him, even in his birth as a deer, and when he's born now, the son of a Brahmin father. He's so it's a combination. There's always a combination. Our free will and our choice to take certain decisions to protect ourselves on our path back to God, and the other side, the Lord is constantly making arrangements. So I think there are two things involved here. This is also
Hmm.
another very, very nice conclusion to draw from. Sorry, excuse me.
Hmm.
Hello. Yeah, hello. Hello, Karana. In the very home. അല്ല ഒന്ന് ഫ്ലാറ്റിൽ കൂടി വരാൻ ഞാൻ പേഴ്സണലി നമ്പർ പറയാം.
Hey guys, got a call from somebody else. We just take some.
വേണ്ട carry on. Thank you. Sorry, yeah, sorry about this. I
Yeah,
couldn't.
I was trying to fill that gap in between, like what I would say, like
No, it's a return, so I couldn't cut him because it's a return
okay,
for a
okay.
query. No, so there I think these two things are there, that it's not just it's our free will and also the Lord's arrangements. Yeah, the Jada Bharat Maharaj is like a fascinating story, and you're making this comparison with Jesus Christ. Actually, Jesus Christ is considered a Shakti Avish avatar, an avatar Shakti Avish that is highly empowered by the Lord. The Christians see him as the son of the Lord, son of God, and he, of course, he takes so much suffering on behalf of humanity. Jada Bharat is taking that suffering. I think one is that he's very much interested in saving himself, which is good, and plus he is genuinely not affected by all this. I guess both personalities are not affected
Both,
at all.
like both are like, I think in his case, like he was almost killed. No, he was kidnapped by some. I mean, in the Bhagavatam they describe them as
Dacoits, dacoits.
dacoits and
Yeah,
all
yeah.
stuff, Shudras or whatever. Like, but basically they take him and they try to kill him, and he's not at all
Correct.
affected. And so he's always, and every time he's constantly protected by. But what makes him very similar in that sense is that uh, people are like, wherever he goes, people are just like, he is somebody that has the truth, but people are so afraid of the truth. So they're constantly like just, beating him up, or they're making fun of him, or they're doing this or doing that. And
But this,
he's not born in like a kingly family. Like in the case of Prahlad Maharaj, Prahlad was born in the family of Hiranyakashipu,
yeah,
and
yeah.
uh, so he was a prince and he had access to all these things. In the case of this person, he was born, I mean, that he's had a life of a deer, and he's had this life where he's a Brahmin, but then all his stuff, like everything is taken away from him from the start of his life itself. And
Mm,
even after, like, I mean, not from start of his life, but somewhere like when his father dies, everything
right,
is
yeah,
taken
yeah.
away. And he's just like made to like walk the whole earth, like just like that, and in
Absolutely.
throughout his time, people are like making fun of him, insulting him, throwing stones at him. They throw stones at him, all stuff. So even all of that, he's still, his dedication is so, he's so focused in his dedication to Krishna, that it doesn't affect what people say, like, what people are saying. So in that aspect, it seemed a lot like, when you hear the story of Christ, it seems like that,
Right.
it's like, so there's a similarity between both of them that I find very interesting.
Sure, sure.
So
Okay.
yeah.
So,
Yeah.
because it's 1:30 now, can we stop here?
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
sure. We've been talking for a very long time.
And no, very nice if we could do this podcast. So we are now going to start with, we have reached the 15th verse of chapter 5, and we have almost another 15 verses to finish in our next class. Okay. Now,
Hmm.
this month also, it will be an alternate week, but
Sure.
once
Hmm.
April starts, we completely get back to weekly.
Okay.
All right. Okay. So we halt here. I have to go and catch up with the domestic stuff here.
Okay. So
Okay.
I'll just stop sharing and stop recording also. Bye,
Okay.
everybody.